Chapter 6. The Frostbitter. A stranger's promise is more reliable than a friend's debt. Reginald, Mayor of Linford. Gwenevere looked concerned, but not as concerned as she should have. Covelin had rarely ever felt this high a concentration of the chill before. In fact, only once before in his life. He closed his eyes and concentrated, trying to get a better feel of it. It was definitely one creature, and an immense amount of the chill pumping through its veins. And there could be no mistaking it. The creature was inside Midfeld. How could a chilling have gotten through Midfeld's circle of protection? Gwenevere asked. It shouldn't even be able to survive in the sunlight, Covelin muttered. Whatever we're up against today is something I've never faced before, and that's impressive. They started towards Midfeld again, moving faster than before. Guinevere's swiftness, no doubt, was motivated by worry, but Covelin, he wasn't sure if he was concerned or excited. It had been a while since he had fought something new. Being as old and well-traveled as he was, there weren't many new things to face in Northost. He almost grinned. If nothing else, he was curious to find out what was going on. When they reached the fence marking Midfeld's circle of protection, Covelin stopped. Gwenevere stopped to step behind him, eyeing the scene warily. The fence's rickety gate had been torn from its hinges and lay on the ground a dozen feet from where it should be. It was covered in a thick, uneven layer of ice. Pieces of the road had also been frozen, with jagged icicles sticking towards the city, as if the water had frozen over while being blown by a fierce wind. What could do this? Gwenevere asked, her voice catching in her throat. I've seen this before, but only once, Covelin murmured. His eyes narrowed. Could it be another frostbitter? During the day? Covelin frowned. More disturbing than the ice and the fence was the irregularity he felt in the circle of protection. The magic of the circle had been modified not long ago, but had since reverted to its normal state. For some undetermined amount of time that was less than a day ago, this part of the circle had been opened. Some powerful magic is at work here, Covelin muttered. You might want to stay back. No way, Gwenevere replied firmly, as she stubbornly followed the Outlander through the fence. So either this chilling is also a powerful wizard, or is in league with one, Covelin thought. He gripped his glaive and lowered it, prepared for danger at any moment, even though he sensed that the chilling was far from them, near the center of Midfeld, or perhaps this chilling has some sort of magic-altering artifact. They made their way through the tilling grounds surrounding the town, and when they entered Midfeld proper, an appalling scene awaited them. The first couple of houses looked like they'd been blasted with ice. Parts of their walls had been torn off by large claws, and several mangled bodies littered the ground. Some of the corpses had been gouged by claws or teeth. Others looked as if they had been trampled, and still others had been frozen. There were some people crying beside the bodies, while others were trying to administer to the few that were still alive. By all the celestial signs, Gwenevere gasped, color draining from her face. This is my home. I could know some of these people. Stay here, Covelin ordered her. I'm going after this thing. Twirling his glaive, he jogged down the street. Screams came from ahead of him. He saw people running toward him. They were waving their arms and shouting for people to run. Covelin jogged by them, keeping his eyes peeled. He could sense that he was close to the creature. Turning a corner, he saw it. Its massive body was like a snake, with two gigantic arms protruding from a torso with broad shoulders beneath its reptilian head. Dull gray scales covered the tip of its tail, the end of its nose, and the 20-foot length of its body in between. Its body was thick, at least 5 feet in diameter. Its claws looked to be made of ice, as did its teeth. From these icy appendages, as well as from its eyes, gushed blue light and white mist, trailing behind it as it paced in the street. For that was what it was doing. Pacing. It didn't have any legs to pace with, but it slithered back and forth, its arms swinging at its sides. Everyone had fled, leaving the street vacant by the time Covelin arrived. Scattered and ice-covered debris littered the ground. The creature had torn apart every house around it except for one, a large, expensive house with multiple stories. This house was completely intact. Though the windows and door were covered in ice, the creature slithered in front of it, snapping and hissing, its eyes locked on the house. I don't believe it, Covelin murmured aloud. Don't believe what? Gwenevere panted, coming to a stop behind him. I thought I told you to stay behind, Covelin snapped. I told you no the first time. I didn't think I'd have to say it the second. Gwenevere replied. She had Lawrence's sword drawn. This is the Sathagat I killed last week, Covelin said. You see those wounds right beneath its arms? I gave it those myself. But they're not affected by the chill like humans are. Making a chilling out of an animal is supposed to be impossible. And it's alive again? As a chilling? Gwenevere said, and then she abruptly screamed, Wait a second, that's my house! She started forward, but Covelin stopped her. That thing will kill you with its little finger, he growled. We've got to go. But it's in front of my house, Gwenevere said anxiously. My father could be in there. You won't be doing anyone any favors by rushing in there and dying, Covelin growled. Come on. He grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her back around the corner, out of sight of the Sathagat. She protested, looking almost like she was going to swing the sword at him, until Covelin stopped and shoved a finger into her face. Shut up, girl. I'm trying to save your life, he snarled. Besides, it wasn't attacking your house. And why wasn't it? Gwenevere asked, her voice shaking. It flattened the houses around mine. My guess? It's waiting for you, Covelin replied grimly. For me? Gwenevere stuttered. You've become very interesting to the world since the last lunar conjunction, Covelin said. Someone poisoned you with Valoith, and that woman Johanna wanted to kill you as well. How'd she find out about you? I have no idea. But if she did, I reckon others have as well. He glanced back towards the Sathagat, his expression dark. The chill isn't supposed to affect animals. I wager a powerful wizard used some sort of black magic to turn the Sathagat into a chilling. And you think that wizard sent the Sathagat here to find me? Gwenevere gasped. That's what makes sense to me, Covelin replied. But whoever it is wants you alive. How do you know that? Gwenevere asked tremulously. She was looking as pale as she had when Covelin first met her. Otherwise, that creature would have flattened your house too, Covelin replied, but it didn't. It's just trying to corner you. If it thinks I'm in there, what's the plan? Wait until I come out? Or until the wizard shows up to extract you personally, Covelin muttered. Gwenevere swayed, looking like she was going to fall over. She steadied herself on Covelin's shoulder. Why is this happening to me? She whispered, a tear falling from her face. I never wanted any of this. Why'd Ravon have to leave me? And Lawrence have to die? And now this! She tore her hands through her hair and turned away, her breathing erratic. Sometimes life just throws you to the dogs, Covelin grunted. You're not the first, nor the last, to land in unfortunate circumstances. What you need to do now is go find a place to hide. Where can I go? Gwenevere asked, almost hysterically. They found me in Weatherpost. They found me here. They'll find me anywhere. It doesn't matter. I can't hide. I might as well accept my fate now and let that thing take me. If you stop trying to keep yourself alive, then Lawrence died in vain, Covelin snapped. Gwenevere blinked, pausing mid-breath. So get yourself to somewhere in Midfeld, to someone who you trust, and lay low. I'm going to have a go at this Sathagat, but it'll take me some time to kill it again. He growled the last word. You're right, Gwenevere mumbled. I'm sorry, I'll go. To the Healthy Hearth. Hexter's an old friend, and it's not anywhere near here. Good, Covelin said. Get there and lay low. I'll kill that thing. Make sure your father's safe, and then come find you. She nodded, tears still falling down her face as she walked away. Don't wait up for me, Covelin told her. This is going to take until after sundown. As Gwenevere took her leave, Covelin moved to the street corner and peered around it. The Sathagat continued to slither back and forth, eyes locked on Guinevere's house. Covelin saw several mutated carcasses strewn just outside the front door. They looked to be in armor. Family guards, perhaps? She really must come from a rich family, Covelin thought, adjusting the grip on his glaive. He backtracked and entered the nearest alleyway. He'd have to wait until sundown to face the Sathagat. It would be a duel night, not as good of a situation as when he fought Johanna, but at least he'd have the first and third moons to help him. Would that be enough? He'd had 3 moons the last time he fought the Sathagat, and that time it hadn't been empowered by the chill. This time, it would be much harder to kill. When the sun had finally set, Covelin had his plan. He occasionally checked around the corner to confirm the Sathagat hadn't left. It had stopped pacing and became stationary in the middle of the street. When the last rays of sun disappeared over the horizon, the creature hissed in excitement. The amount of mist and blue light leaking from its eyes, claws, and teeth increased. Covelin had spent the last few hours analyzing the creature, and the unique difficulties it could present this time. Chillings couldn't feel pain, nor did they bleed. That gave him 2 disadvantages already. They weren't as smart as live creatures, which meant it would be slower to strategize or change its course. Chillings were known for headlong charges, and that was about it. Of course, this creature was different. It had been out during the day, and had a clear mission. It didn't mindlessly kill everything in its path, but rather only those that got in its way. It hadn't attacked Gwenevere's home. That all suggested a higher mental capacity than most Chillings, or perhaps specific orders given to it by its maker. Covelin didn't know. He did suspect it had some sort of powers he didn't know about, judging by all the ice he'd seen that it left in its wake. Normal Chillings couldn't do anything like that. As he tried to calculate the unknown risks, Covelin decided to focus on what he did know. He knew that separating the head from the body was the quickest way to kill a Chilling. But the Sathagut's neck was long, 5 feet thick, and covered in scales. Removing its head would be difficult. That was the thought on Covelin's mind as he rounded the corner to face the Sathagut. He could feel the 2 moons above him through the clouds, the magical strength of Augmentus and Forsus, the first and third moons, pumped through his veins. He had these last time he'd fought the Sathagut, of course, and it had still been tough. Resting his glaive against the corner house's front door, Covelin unstrapped his quiver and laid it on the ground before removing his bow. He took off his coat and laid the fur beside his quiver, revealing the glittering blue scales that made up his breastplate, as well as the round wooden medallion that hung from around his neck. Fingering the medallion tenderly, he slid it beneath his armor to ensure its safety before turning to face the Sathagut. "All right, beastie, let's see what you're made of," Covelin muttered, taking 3 arrows from his quiver. He held 2 between his fingers, while notching the third on his bow and taking aim. The Sathagut remained staring at the house, half a block away from him, its tongue flickering in and out of its mouth. Covelin held his breath as he aimed, honing in on his target. He let both the arrow and his breath loose simultaneously. The arrow shot through the air and entered the Sathagut's left eye, sinking several inches into its head. The creature howled in surprise, and turned to face Covelin, glaring at him with its one good eye. The Chilling surged down the street toward him, jaw gaping open. Covelin shot a second arrow, aiming for the Sathagut's other eye. He instead pierced it in its nose, which didn't faze it. Covelin shot his third arrow, but it burst against the creature's skull, right between its eyes. "Blast," he muttered, casting his bow aside and snatching up his glaive. The Sathagut's erratic arms and flailing head had made aiming difficult, and he didn't have any more time to shoot. The Sathagut had reached him. Charging forward, Covelin bounded into the air. He gave the ground a magical push, causing himself to hurtle diagonally right over the Sathagut's snapping jaws. With a roar as a battle cry, Covelin drove his glaive into the beast's neck as he fell. It split the Sathagut's scales, sending the blade protruding out the other side before losing momentum. Covelin hung tight to the glaive, jerking to a stop 10 feet of the ground. The glaive slid slightly, but remained lodged in the beast's throat. The Sathagut shrieked and thrashed, while white mist billowing from its jaws. Covelin's knuckles whitened as he gripped the glaive, while the rest of his body was thrown about like a rag doll. The Sathagut raised its claws, groping blindly at its back. Keeping one hand firmly on the glaive, Covelin used the other hand to yank free his short sword from its sheath, hacking and slashing. He severed several of the Sathagut's extended fingers, causing mist to spew from the wounds. Hissing in irritation, the Sathagut slammed its body into the ground face first, jolting Covelin violently, causing him to almost lose his grip. The Sathagut rolled over, smashing Covelin beneath itself and the ground. His glaive jerked sideways, wrenching itself from its hands. Covelin was left wheezing on the ground as the Sathagut finished its roll and began to rise. Springing to his feet, Covelin launched himself into the air, again bursting the ground with magic to increase the height of his jump. He landed on the Sathagut's head and slid backwards, just barely managing to grab it around the throat with one hand and squeeze his knees into it to keep himself from falling. The Sathagut bucked and flailed, but Covelin kept his grip. He began brutally hacking at the neck, ignoring the ice-cold mist that sprayed all over him from the wound. The Sathagut seized him around the middle and tore him off. Snarling, the beast threw Covelin, sending him hurtling towards Gwenevere's home. Extending his free hand, Covelin sent a magical blast towards the mansion. The wood creaked and a nearby window cracked, but the magical push slowed Covelin's speed. By the time he hit the house, it was almost at a comfortable speed. He fell, tumbling sideways towards the ground, but another push, this time downward, slowed his fall and he landed safely. The Sathagut slithered in a circle, its one good eye analyzing Covelin carefully. Covelin tried to catch his breath, but found it difficult to inhale. His arms trembled with exertion, and he felt the throbbing pain in the back of his head. This thing's stronger than it was before, Covelin thought. Howling, the Sathagat let loose a spray of white mist. Covelin dove to the side, avoiding the mist by mere inches. It covered the wall of Guinevere's home with ice. Blast! Covelin spat, but he couldn't deny the excitement swelling in his chest at the same time. After weeks of searching, he'd finally found another frostbitter. The Sathagat shot forward, its massive body slithering impressively fast across the cobblestone street. Covelin extended his hand and gave a push of magic to his glaive, which was still lodged in the Sathagat's back. The glaive slid out backward and hovered in the air. Clenching his hand into a fist, he sent the glaive hurtling forward and slamming back through the Sathagat's neck. The force of the blow caused it to crumple forward, its face crashing into the ground. Covelin magically retracted the glaive a second time and launched it back through the beast's throat, which now had sustained multiple considerable wounds. With a few more good hacks, Covelin thought he could cut the neck clean through. The Sathagat roared and launched itself forward, reaching Covelin with the glaive still embedded in its neck. Covelin ducked beneath its claws and leapt into the air, pushing off the ground magically to send himself flying up to the creature's head. Unfortunately, as he pushed off, Covelin's knees buckled. He flipped sideways in the air, missed his mark, and slammed into the beast's shoulder. Been using too much magic, he thought. He could feel the spell fatigue in more than just his knees. Covelin's arms trembled. He found it difficult to keep a grip on his sword, and breathing was becoming more of a struggle. After colliding with the Sathagat's shoulder, Covelin tumbled downward. The beast clawed at him in the air. Luckily, Covelin's scaly breastplate was strong enough to deflect the creature's claws. His bracers, however, were not. The Sathagat's talon torn through the steel and his arm, leaving long, burning scars on his skin. Covelin hit the ground, his teeth grit against the pain. His own blood began warmly seething from his arm and dripping to the street. Bleeding time, he thought. Dropping his sword, he covered both his hands in blood as he rose to his feet, just as the Sathagat reared back and let loose another blast of white mist. Covelin didn't have time to avoid it. Raising his hands to access the power he felt emanating from the blood covering his fingers, he let loose a blast of magic to counter the mist. The hissing mist stopped a foot from his outstretched hands, as if it had come against an invisible barrier. The mist sprayed off in different directions, leaving a trail of scattering ice in its wake. The world spun beneath Covelin, and his arms began to tremble. If it hadn't been for the extra power he'd gotten from his blood, he wouldn't have been able to hold back the blast. As it was, the Sathagat snapped its jaws in frustration and stopped its attack. As the mist cleared, it revealed a wall of ice had formed between Covelin and the beast, with icicles spiking out in all directions. Taking a haggard breath, Covelin retrieved his sword. I need a new plan, he thought. As the Sathagat rounded the icy wall, Covelin threw his sword and pushed it with magic. The weapon spun twice before embedding itself in the Sathagat's neck. Gripping his hands on the air before him, as if he were taking hold of the sword's handle, Covelin jerked his arms to the side. The sword jerked as well, tearing out of the creature's neck, leaving a massive gash in its wake. The world went dark for a second, and Covelin staggered to his knees. His sword clattered to the ground. He put a hand to his head, trembling fiercely. No more magic, he ordered himself. You'll kill yourself before the Sathagat does. The creature shrieked and charged forward. A major part of its neck was missing. Covelin was so close, but he was out of strength and out of ideas. Turning, he raced towards the door of Gwenevere's mansion. The Sathagat was going to catch up to him at any moment. He bounded over the massacred and frozen bodies of the guards and threw himself against the door with all his strength and weight. If not for Augmentus' added strength, he would have broken his shoulder instead of the door. As it was, the ice shattered, and the door burst open. Covelin fell into the mansion, landing flat on his face. He heard the Sathagat howl in frustration outside. Staggering to his feet, Covelin looked back. The Sathagat was hanging back, glaring at him. It didn't look interested in entering the home. Probably has orders not to, Covelin thought in satisfaction, in case it would inadvertently hurt Gwenevere. The Sathagat opened its mouth, and Covelin darted out of the way just in time. Another blast of mist blew through the door, and covered the entire entryway in ice. Covelin, having lunged into the coat closet, lay there as the creature howled and snapped its jaws. But Covelin knew he was safe, at least for the moment. He still assumed the creator of this beast would arrive eventually to find Gwenevere. That didn't give Covelin time to wait. He'd already risked too much by waiting until sundown, but that hadn't been an option. The Sathagat would have destroyed him if he hadn't had the power of the moons on his side. Covelin tried to rise, but his limbs refused. He lay on the ground in the small closet, surrounded by expensive coats hanging on the walls around him. for what must have been several minutes. Breath came only through struggle, and the world continued spinning around him. Finally, he managed to drag himself to his feet. No sword, no glaive, no bow. Covan peered back into the entryway. The house was dark. As far as he could tell, it was abandoned. Not a single light was lit anywhere. Was Gwenevere's father really in here somewhere? Probably hiding from the Sathagat. Covan could hear the beast's heavy, grating breathing just outside the door. He'd have to run through the entryway to avoid getting blasted by ice. No allies. Can't use more magic. I've already gotten myself into trouble this time, haven't I? Covan waited another few minutes to catch his breath. Breathing remained difficult, but the world eventually stopped lurching beneath him. That'd have to be enough. Squaring his shoulders, he looked down the entryway. He saw one main hallway leading further into the house, along with several staircases leading off in different directions. Just get out of that thing's range, he told himself. Taking as deep a breath as he could manage, Covan darted out of the closet and raced towards the hallway. He heard the Sathagat inhale behind him, preparing for a blast of ice. With adrenaline increasing his speed on top of Augmentus's power, Covan charged down the hallway as white mist again flooded the entryway. Covan felt a wave of cold hit his back, but he wasn't encased in ice. He'd made it. Looking back, he saw the entrance of the hallway was now blocked off by ice. Fine, I'll find another way out. The hallway was wide and carpeted, with finely carved baseboards and crown moldings upon the walls. Expensive portraits decorated certain sections of the walls, and an expensive chandelier hung from the ceiling a few yards above Covan's head. That girl really is rich, he thought. He moved down the hallway, grimacing slightly. His arm had been torn up pretty badly. Upon reaching a winding staircase, Covan ascended. Passing the second floor, he continued up to the third, where he found a pair of guards. They yelped in surprise at the sight of Covan and leveled their spears. I'm on your side, I promise, Covan grunted. I'm trying to kill that thing outside. Is Gwenevere's father here? The guards exchanged a worried glance, eyes wide with terror. They wore blue uniforms, with a yellow stripe running down the arms. The older, more experienced guard took a step forward. What's your name, intruder? He demanded. I'm Covan, Covan grunted impatiently. Now tell me, is Gwenevere's father here? The guards didn't look ready to respond, but a weak voice called from somewhere behind them. He is. I'm here. Let him in, Hubert. The guards frowned but didn't argue. Follow me, one of them said snidely, presumably Hubert. Covan followed the two of them down a short hallway and into a luxurious chamber, furnished with all that a king would have. The room was dark, as everything was in the mansion, but that didn't hinder Covan. He could in fact see better in the dark than he could in the light. Even then, it was hard to see the man lying in the four-poster bed in the corner of the room. He lay perfectly still beneath substantial blankets, with his head just barely propped up on a large pillow. Two more guards stood on either side of the bed, looking apprehensive. An old man sat to the side of the bed, who had a pair of spectacles dangling around his neck, and he held a book, now forgotten, in his wrinkled hands. Who might you be? The older man asked. A friend, Covan grunted. And you? Jinx, butler of the Rigby household. How do we know we can trust you? That you aren't in league with that monster, the old man demanded. It did this to me, Covan snapped, gesturing to the bloody gashes covering his arm. Let him speak, the man in the bed whispered, and Covan recognized his voice as the one that had called off the guards at the stairs. I am Rigby, Gwenevere's father. You spoke of my daughter? Where is she? She's here, hiding in the Healthy Hearth Inn, Covan replied. Did she find Nildark? Rigby asked offhandedly. Covan narrowed his eyes. She did. She'll live. Rigby almost looked amused. It's been over a week. I didn't know if she'd made it. That's impressive, actually. Covan frowned, glaring at the guards in the room. And why in Shazar's name did you send her alone? You sat here, surrounded by your guards, while she ran off into the night, with nobody but her brother to defend her. I heard there was a wizard in town, Rigby replied. He coughed quietly, his face scrunching in pain. I sent her to find him. I told her she'd be fine. And she was, wasn't she? She nearly died on multiple occasions, Covan snarled. Rigby didn't blink. And what of Lawrence? He did die, Covan snapped. Rigby tisked quietly. I told him he shouldn't have gone. Fool of a boy, Jinx muttered, looking back to his book. You don't care about your children at all, Covan growled. To Shazar you can go, all of you. Are you aware of what my daughter has done? Rigby asked, in a well-measured tone. What she carries? I am, Coven snapped. And you think she should live? Rigby asked flatly. I offered her a fool's chance of survival out of a father's responsibility. Nothing more. I expected her to die in the attempt. Coven fumed, but bit back everything he had to say. Don't have time for this, he thought, clenching and unclenching his hands. I need a chain, he grunted, and at least a dozen feet in length. Whatever for? Rigby asked, his eyebrows raised curiously. To kill that chilling Sathika you have up front, Coven snapped. Ah, that would be nice, Rigby said unconcernedly, as if the monster Sathika were nothing more than a bothersome household pest. It's been making an awful racket all night. Jinx, would you help him find what he needs? You trust him, my lord? Jinx asked, narrowing his eyes at Coven. Of course not, Rigby coughed. But if he succeeds, we have one less Sathika to worry about, and if he dies, we've lost nothing. Let him try, I say. Coven had a lot he could have said to that, but he decided to remain silent and follow Jinx out of the room instead. The old butler, accompanied by two of the guards, led Coven down the long hallway, up another staircase, and to a small, dusty door. Jinx opened the door and gestured the guards inside. They disappeared beyond it for several long moments, and when they reappeared, they were dragging a long chain between them. The staff use this for the mansion's dumbwaiter system, the butler said, as Coven took the rusted chain from the guards and began looping it around his uninjured arm. We replaced the chain a few years back, but kept this one in the attic. Is this long enough for your needs? It's plenty, Coven replied. The chain was longer than he wanted, but it would still work. Is there a way to get onto the roof? Yes, right over there, Jinx said, gesturing to an old ladder at the end of the hallway. Go tell Rigby that if I kill this thing, he owes me 300 blocks, Coven growled, and he headed toward the ladder.